30 seconds or so to start rolling in. We'll go ahead and get started. Still increasing. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. I know people are slowly rolling in, but good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Reginald Parson, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Paid Family and Medical Leave Program. And on behalf of the Paid Family and Medical Leave Program, we welcome you to today's webinar in collaboration with the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition. Today's event will be recorded and posted on the department's webpage on paid family and medical leave. On the call with me is Sarah Bryden, our PFML Claims Administration Division Director, and Sophia Khalid, our PFML Policy and Outreach Specialist. I also want to take the time to thank any members of the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Benefits Authority that also are in attendance today. So next, I would like to take this time to thank the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition for being a partner and working with us to host this webinar. Now I will hand it off to our friends with the coalition to offer any brief remarks if they wish.
Hello, I'm Panayoti Cholkas, work for the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition. Thank you all for joining us. MERC is a coalition of over 100 members and partners across the state, and we invite you to join and get involved with our work. You can learn more about us at maineimmigrantrights.org, and we look forward to learning more about this program. Thank you all.
Awesome. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so now the program will provide a brief overview of the benefit portion of the Paid Family and Medical Leave Program that will be led by Sarah Bryden. After the overview, we will answer questions. But if you do have a question as you're listening to Sarah's presentation, please put your question in the Q&A function on Zoom. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you so much. I just want to confirm everybody can see the PowerPoint presentation that I just started sharing. Super.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I am so glad to be here talking with you all for the next hour. Like Reggie said, my name is Sarah Bryden, and I'm the Claims Administration Division Director with the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Bureau. It's a big, long title, but basically what that means is I am responsible for working with the claims administrator. The Department of Labor selected AFLAC to operate and do all the administrative work of the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Program. So my job is working closely with them to make sure that they are providing a really high level of service for the employers and workers of Maine. As many of you probably know, the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Program begins in terms of benefits on May 1st of 2026, which is just a couple of weeks away. Very exciting stuff. And that means that in order for somebody to get benefits, they have to be out of work on or after May 1st. That's coming right up. So there's a lot to know about from a worker and also an employer perspective before that date arrives. So hopefully you will leave this hour with more knowledge than you had when you joined. And we're going to go through some of that information now. Okay. So I want to sort of set the stage in terms of the high level topics that I'm going to be covering while we're meeting together. First, I am going to go over a little bit of the basics of the law and the program. It might be a bit of a refresher for some folks, but I want to make sure that we're starting from a foundational point of shared understanding before getting into some of the more detailed weeds. Next, I will turn to, again, AFLAC, the company that we have selected to administer this program on behalf of the Maine Department of Labor. So a little bit of information about how that's going to actually work functionally. When employees need to be out of work, how they will submit their application, an overview of what AFLAC will then do with that application in terms of what they will review, how they will review it, and if somebody is approved for benefits, how AFLAC will calculate that benefit amount. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about what employers need to know if a worker has applied for Maine paid family and medical leave. There's a little bit of an interaction there with employers and wanted to, cover some of those things. And finally, wrapping up with some tips, tricks, and best practice recommendations for that. So it's a lot of content. And I'm going to try to, again, as Reggie was talking about, leave some time at the end for Q&A. So let's get started, though, on the basics of Maine paid family and medical leave, sort of at the 101, very high level. Let's get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is answering the question, who is going to be able to take Maine paid family and medical leave once benefits begin in May of 2026. For some folks that might be aware of other state programs or other, leave laws and programs that are already existing, compared to some of those other programs, Maine paid family and medical leave casts a wide net. So almost all employees in Maine could potentially take Maine paid family and medical leave. There is no, thinking about this program in comparison to other existing paid and unpaid leave programs, the generosity is a little bit more substantial in terms of all work sizes. So all company work sizes down to, one employee covered. There's no gatekeeping in terms of, you have to have at least X number of employees or other things like that, or no minimum amount of time worked for a particular employer. So things like that. So it is a very wide net, but that does not mean that everybody is going to be filing a claim and getting benefits on May 1. So the as long as phrase in that line up at the top is very important. So in order to take paid family and medical leave wage replacement benefits, somebody does have to meet certain criteria. So, and each of these bullet points is going to be on a later slide as well with a little bit more detail, but just to set the stage. So the as long as criteria points are first, meeting an earnings requirement in order to be eligible. Also, needing to be out of work for a covered reason, as stated in our law. Next would be providing documentation to show to AFLAC, again, administering the program, that they are in fact out of work for that covered reason that they've stated. And then finally, in order to get approved for Maine paid family and medical leave, the person has to have enough time left to use. So it is a relatively wide net that this program casts across the state. There are two situations where coverage is optional. First being tribal governments. So if a tribal government in Maine is an employer, they can choose to participate and have their employees covered. And then the other elected coverage example would be self-employed individuals. So self-employed individuals can opt in, can elect coverage, and choose to participate if they would like to be in the program. There are a handful of exceptions. So it's almost all employees in Maine, but not all. There are a handful of exceptions. And I just highlighted a few here. People who work for the federal government, federal work study scenarios, incarcerated workers. And just to make the point that it is not 100% of workers in Maine, it's almost all of that. In terms of identifying whether somebody is in one of these exception categories or not, generally speaking, that would have been identified back in the start of 2025 when the process of submitting wage reports and remitting contribution premiums. When that started happening, that's an opportunity to identify who's in and who's out. So we've established that there's a lot of people who potentially, maybe, might be able to take paid family and medical leave. Um, and one of those bullet points that I referred to was, do they have enough time left to use? So now I want to talk about how much time away from work our program provides. So our program provides up to 12 weeks of leave in a 12-month period. And that 12-month period is a very specific period called a benefit year. The benefit year starts on the Sunday of the week when somebody first goes out on leave, and it runs 12 months into the future from there. So that's the benefit year. That's the 12-month period that we're talking about when we talk about whether somebody has time left to use. And again, that's up to 12 weeks of leave. Up to is doing a lot of work in that phrase. So certainly, some life scenarios, some workers are dealing with things that would potentially require them to be out of work for 12 weeks. Not every situation is in that category. So, as other states have found with their programs, oftentimes employees will submit an application for paid leave for 3 weeks or 6 weeks or some other shorter period of time. Up to literally means up to. It does not mean that everybody is going to take 12 weeks of leave. However much time somebody does need for a covered event, that time does not have to be taken all at once. It can be taken in blocks of continuous time. So when we say continuous time, we mean, a block of time where somebody is out of work and then goes back to work. There might be, for example, a 3-week leave, and then the person goes back to work. Later in the same benefit year, perhaps they have another life event that requires them to go out for 4 weeks of leave, as an example. Intermittent leave is a term that many of you might already know about or have used in the context of other types of leave of absence. But that's really a scenario where somebody needs to be out of work in a more sporadic way. So one single leave reason that might be applicable over a period of time, but then within that period of time, maybe somebody needs to be out of work 1 day a week. It might be for a reason that is not as predictable. So health conditions often will create a need for intermittent leave like that. And then the reduced schedule leave is similar to intermittent leave, but it's in a more repeatable pattern. So for example, if somebody has a scheduled work week of 5 days, and they know that for the next couple of months, they're going to need to work only 3 days. That would be an example of reduced schedule. In terms of intermittent leave, that's a good example of sometimes that an employee might request a partial day of leave. The Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave program is envisioned to be used in increments as small as 1 hour. So not 15 minutes, not, somebody saying I need to be, 18 minutes late because of a doctor's appointment. We're talking about increments that are as small as 1 hour. And in terms of taking less than a full day of leave, that is allowable as long as the employee and the employer agree. If the employer does not agree, then the concept of our program is for leave to be taken in 1 day increments. So if you are following along as I'm going through the slide, you'll see that there's one bullet point I have not addressed directly, and that has to do with the way Maine PFML runs concurrently with other leave entitlements. Again, many of you might already be well-versed in things like federal and Maine state FMLA, but the idea is that our program is going to run concurrently with those things as often as possible. And I'm going to now go to the next slide that gets a little bit more detailed with this concept. So Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave is intended to run concurrently with other leave entitlements, not in addition to them, as often as possible. And to that end, we have a provision that specifies that if somebody is requesting Maine paid family and medical leave, part of the analysis is to ask, okay, well, did they take any Maine FMLA or federal FMLA by itself without Maine paid family and medical leave in the year leading up to the start of their request? If yes, that amount of time can reduce the employee's 12 weeks of Maine paid family and medical leave available to them. So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of hypothetical examples here on the screen. The first one is, let's say Ed took 2 weeks of leave in February of this year. And let's say that was approvable under federal and Maine FMLA. Maine PFML would not have been approved because the program has not started yet. And then hypothetically, let's say he then requests 12 weeks of leave in July of this year after the program start date. Whether or not federal or Maine FMLA gets approved for that absence is based on a whole set of other factors that we don't know about. But for the purposes of Maine paid family and medical leave, Ed would be potentially restricted to 10 weeks of leave because those 2 weeks in February were approved for federal and Maine FMLA, so they reduce his available time moving forward. To contrast that, let's talk about this other hypothetical. Emily takes, again, 2 weeks of time away from work in February of 2026, but it is not approvable as federal or state FMLA. Again, not approvable for Maine PFML because the program's not active yet. So because none of this time is approved for federal or Maine FMLA, it does not constitute a rejection of Emily's potential 12 weeks of leave in July of 2026. So in this case, Emily would potentially be able to get all 12 weeks of her July 2026 leave request approved. So we've talked about how long somebody could potentially be out on Maine paid family and medical leave. Now we're going to talk about some of the reasons why somebody might submit an application. Again, there's some overlap with federal and state FMLA. Some of these leave reasons will look quite familiar to folks that are familiar with those programs. But just to make sure that everybody has, again, a shared foundational understanding of what we're talking about. Bonding leave is time to bond with a child that is being welcomed into the employee's family, either by adoption, foster care, or childbirth. Caring for a family member with a serious health condition is another reason somebody might take leave. Military family leave, specifically, so sometimes this can be a little bit confusing for folks. I want to make sure everybody's very clear. This is not for the worker or the applicant being in the military. Rather, this is for that worker's family member being in the military and the worker then needing to take time away from work and deal with some things related to their family member's military deployment. For folks that are familiar with federal FMLA, this would be considered qualifying exigency. It's the term that is used in that context in no other place. But so qualifying exigency leave has to do with things like, for example, if a worker has let's say a spouse who is in the military and is being deployed, and then the employee, the worker, needs to maybe go to the bank, make arrangements, have legal documents written up, make different childcare arrangements to account for the fact that their spouse is getting deployed, things like that. Medical leave is another very common, and I think a leave reason that folks generally are pretty familiar with and think about when they think about family and medical leave programs. Of course, when a serious health condition is keeping the person from being at work. And then finally, our law also covers safe leave. and that is to allow workers to seek safety when they or a family member are dealing with situations of violence or abuse. So I want to take a quick moment and talk about these sub-bullet points. So each of these sub-bullet points talks about when we're talking about family member lists. So I'm not going to read them all, but the family members that are listed here under care for a family member are identified directly within the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Statute. So that's where we get that list. The leave reason of military family leave, and if you're reading ahead, leave for death of a family member who dies while they're in the active duty service in the military. These are different family member lists because the Paid Family and Medical Leave Statute points to other laws in order to get these leave reasons included. So the qualifying exigency leave scenario that I was talking about, that is the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Law pointing to federal FMLA. And federal FMLA says that for the purposes of military family leave qualifying exigency, a family member means the spouse, child, or parent. So that's what we use for that specific leave reason in our program. And then the Maine FMLA contains the leave reason of leave to deal with the death of a spouse, domestic partner, parent, sibling, or child if they were to die while they're on active duty service in the military. So again, that's the Paid Family and Medical Leave Law pointing to another law, Maine FMLA, to get that leave reason and family member list. So that's a lot of PFML 101 information, and we are now going to move into the next section of the presentation, specifically about AFLAC. So again, the Department of Labor issued an RFP and did a bidding process and a selection process, and we selected AFLAC to be the company that is administering this program on our behalf. So that means when an employee finds that they need to be out of work and they want to apply for Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave, what they need to do is they need to contact AFLAC. And I'm just going to take a brief pause here and point out that this presentation, AFLAC's administrative services, are specific to the public plan. If employers have chosen to use a private plan and get a private plan substitution approved for that purpose, that's a separate conversation. You can certainly reach out to our team, go to our website, get more information about that. But this discussion here during this hour is specifically about the public plan. So in order to get in touch with AFLAC and submit that application, there's two main ways to do that. So there's online portal and there's call center. So the program website, so the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Program, our website is maine.gov/paid leave. It's in pretty big font. I'm going to say it another couple of times before we're done with this presentation, but it is full of information. It has FAQs, it has recorded webinars, it has lots of information, and it has the link for folks to get into the AFLAC employee portal to submit a request for leave. AFLAC is also staffing a call center Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, so that if folks need either trying to navigate the portal and maybe needing an answer to a question or needing some help, or for folks that maybe don't have online access or just would prefer to speak with somebody over the phone, that is also an option. And that phone number is available on maine.gov/paid leave. It's important also to note that, I've said a couple of times, in order to get the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave process started, what happens is the employee submits an application to AFLAC. That's true. But I wanted to take a moment and also clarify and really reinforce that employees also need to be notifying their employer when they need to be out of work. So the idea and the vision of our program is that employees and employers are maintaining open communication through this process. We are not the intent is not for an employer to get a notification from AFLAC, and that's how they learn that their employee needs to be out on paid family and medical leave. That's not the idea. So the expectation is that an employee let their employer know. If it's an absence that they know about far in advance, 30 days is a reasonable time frame to be giving that notice. Oftentimes, somebody has, life will throw a curveball and a surprise, and sometimes it's just not possible to foresee the need for leave. So in sort of a sudden necessity or emergency situation, the expectation would be that the employee let the employer know as soon as feasible. And then that also would be expected to be a written notice. That could be a text. It could be an email. It could be a letter on paper, but probably not very often. And it needs to include the timing, so when the person needs to be out, for how long, and the reason for the need for PFML. So let's assume that the employee has contacted the employer and been in conversation and then has submitted an application with AFLAC. AFLAC's going to take that in, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to ask the question, is this employee eligible for Maine paid family and medical leave? And the answer to that question in the law is essentially an earnings requirement. So employers have, since January of last year, been filing quarterly wage reports and also remitting premiums. So the premium contributions are all piling up in a fund from which the benefits are going to be paid. But then also the other piece of that is the wage report data is also getting saved in our systems so that it will be available for AFLAC to use and answer these questions of, did the applicant earn enough money in the state of Maine to be eligible to participate and potentially get benefits. So the statutory earnings requirement for our program is that the employee must have earned a certain amount in Maine employment wages in a certain time period. And both of those things are in the law. And so that's what we're adhering to. So the certain amount is 6 times the state average weekly wage. The state average weekly wage is a number that gets published each year, and it changes each year. At this point, it is $1,199. Later in 2026, it will get revised and published, and then we will start using that number. But so 6 times that number is $7,194. So AFLAC's going to be looking to see, did the person have $7,194 of Maine earnings in a certain time period? So the certain time period is called the person's base period. And that is defined in our law as the first 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters before the start of the leave. That is such a potentially confusing phrase and concept, but it is this way for a specific set of reasons. So the time period is 4 calendar quarters, so 1 year, so that we can be looking at the applicant's earnings over a relatively long period of time. This helps with things like seasonal employees or people who might have other reasons for fluctuations in their earnings, and it avoids unexpected outcomes. If the program was only looking back, oh, what did you earn last week, or what did you earn 3 weeks ago? That's a very different story in some cases than looking at 4 calendar quarters. What did you earn? Tally it all up and use that to really even out any fluctuations that might have happened. And then the first four of the last five, so if you look at the last 5 calendar quarters, the most recent one is not part of the review. That's a gap quarter. And that also sounds quite convoluted. And, why on earth would you do that? That has a reason as well. So, like I said, employers across the state have been uploading and providing wage reports. And at the close of each calendar quarter, so quarter one, January, February, March, end of March, that's the end of quarter one, an employer then has 30 days after that, so basically all of April, to send in the wage reports for their employees. So during the month of April, this data is trickling in. And if we had set it up differently to say the most recent 4 calendar quarters, if anybody filed a claim in April, we'd very likely not have the data that we need. Or AFLAC would not have the data that they need to be able to, as of the date of application, start looking at this question. Did they earn enough money in this time period? And be able to accurately and efficiently and effectively get that answer back to the applicant very, very promptly. So having that gap quarter is really important because the way it's set up, almost all the time, in almost all scenarios, AFLAC's going to have that data ready to go, make a decision same day or close to it, and move forward with the process. So the other thing I want to say about this concept is the wage data is reviewed on an aggregate basis. So if somebody worked in Maine for one company and then moved to another company, or had 2 or 3 jobs at a time, all of that Maine employment wage data is getting combined for the purposes of this review, because the program is designed to be a portable benefit. So you can switch jobs, and you don't have to build up a separate wage base with each company that somebody works for. It's all part of the same pool and the same review, and an employee can move from company to company and still, assuming that they meet all the other criteria, use the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Program. Okay, so let's assume that the person who has applied for leave is eligible. They meet the earnings requirement. The next thing AFLAC is going to do is they are going to let the employee know you have to send in documentation to support the leave reason that they've said they need leave for. And each type of each leave reason has specific documentation aligned with that leave reason. And they're pretty intuitive. If somebody is taking leave to bond with a new child, it's proof of that child's birth, adoption, or placement. Caring for a family member requires that family member's healthcare provider to fill out a form, a certification form showing this person has a serious health condition and needs care. Military family leave requires proof of that family member's call to active duty. For medical leave, so for the employee's own serious health condition, their doctor would need to fill out a certification form showing that person has a serious health condition that's keeping them from being at work. And then for safe leave, the employee would need to submit an attestation that they or their family member are experiencing an unsafe situation. Okay, so the person's eligible, they send in documentation. The third thing that AFLAC will then do is calculate the person's benefits. So Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave benefits are partial wage replacement. They're not intended to be a full wage replacement. But again, AFLAC will use all of that quarterly wage data. It's the same wage data that was used to determine whether the person earned the 6 times the state average weekly wage. That aggregate tallied up earnings data over the 4 quarters is divided by 52 to arrive at the person's average weekly wage. And then that average weekly wage number gets run through a relatively complicated equation calculation to arrive at the person's weekly benefit amount. And there's a maximum, there's a cap on that weekly benefit amount. The cap is the state average weekly wage, which is a familiar concept that we talked about a few slides ago. So this slide it's pretty dense, but I wanted to just sort of show a few different scenarios to show and demonstrate at a high level how this works. So the very complicated calculation is loosely represented here in the tier 1 wage replacement and the tier 2 wage replacement columns. So on the left, each of these 3 lines is a different hypothetical employee. So the program is part of the reason for doing the tiers, the tier 1 and tier 2, is to take claims for lower wage earners and replace their wages, more of their wages at a higher percentage, to be a little bit more progressive in terms of how different levels of wage earners are interacting with the program. So if you have, for example, somebody who has $15,600 in all of those wage reported numbers over the base period, divide that by 52, their average weekly wage would be $300. All of that $300 gets replaced at 90% for a weekly benefit amount of $270. And then the second hypothetical worker has a base period earnings tally of $57,000. Again, divide by 52, and that's their average weekly wage. In this scenario, part of their average weekly wage will get replaced at 90%, and part of it will get replaced at 66% for a result of $867 for a weekly benefit amount. And then finally, just to show what would happen for a hypothetical higher wage earner. So this person has $90,000 in base period earnings, and divided by 52, that's $1,730. Again, part of that will get replaced at 90%. Part of it will get replaced at 66%. But the most important part of this line is showing that no matter what those dollar amounts add up to, the maximum weekly benefit amount is $1,199. So that's what they will receive. So that's what they will receive as long as there are no adjustments. So that previous slide was the calculation of the weekly benefit amount. There are some reasons why the weekly benefit amount might then need a little bit more math. So the first one would be that AFLAC will take the weekly benefit amount and prorate it for partial week absences. So that would be, for example, if somebody worked a 5-day work week, Monday through Friday, and took a full day for a migraine, that would be 20% of their weekly benefit amount would be payable potentially for that 1-day absence. Partial week absences also happen when somebody is out for, let's say, 6 or 8 weeks, but they go out of work not on a Monday, if they work Monday through Friday. So let's say they go out on a Thursday. That Thursday, Friday would be a partial week absence. There are a couple of situations where our law requires that the weekly benefit amount be reduced. For example, if the person is approved for paid family and medical leave and also unemployment or also workers' compensation. And then also an applicant can indicate to AFLAC that they would like to have tax withholding done on their benefits. It's really important to note that benefits are not going to be reduced or offset for partial wage replacement. So if an employer has a short-term disability policy that's still in place, the AFLAC operating and administering our program is not going to be asking for information about those other benefits and then reducing the Maine paid family and medical leave weekly benefit amount. That is outside the scope of what they're doing and what our law says. Also calling back a few slides ago to the mention that this is a partial wage replacement program, not a full wage replacement program. Oftentimes, employees will need to have their earnings be consistent and need to essentially, the term often used is top up to their regular wages. So if somebody is potentially getting, 90% or functionally closer to 70 or 80% of what they're used to earning, they can oftentimes work with an employer to use some PTO to bring them back up to what they're used to getting, in their bank account each week. And that use of PTO, that topping up money, is not going to be reduced from their weekly benefit amount. Functionally, at a high level, the intent here is not for somebody to take 40 hours of PTO and then also get paid family and medical leave for the same time period. That's not the intent. So it's really up to employers to be looking at the whole picture and making sure that employees are not essentially double dipping, but are making about what they would have made if they were still at work. So this is a little bit of I don't want to say redundant, but it goes over some of the things we were talking about before in a little bit more detail. So again, AFLAC has an employee portal that's accessible to folks 24/7, 365 days a year. Their customer service support, their call center is not open every single day, but it is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so employees can go online or call to create a claim. If they already have a claim set up, they can add time. So if, for example, they're out for medical leave and then they realize, oh, I'm actually, my recovery is going a little slower than I thought, they can add time to that claim, ask questions about their claim, send in their documentation. Another thing that folks can do either by phone or through the AFLAC portal is indicating to AFLAC, if my claim's approved and I'm getting benefits, here's how I want you to pay me. So AFLAC can do direct deposit. So the person applying can go online and go into the portal and enter their bank account information, and then any benefits would be direct deposited into their bank account. AFLAC runs payments once a week. If somebody is unbanked or for whatever reason does not want to provide their bank account information, AFLAC will instead put benefits on a prepaid debit MasterCard and put that in the mail to the person. Also within the portal, folks can view correspondence. So if AFLAC needs to send a letter, hey, we need more information, or you're approved, or any number of communications that AFLAC might need to convey will appear in a letter. And that last bullet point about communication preferences, each applicant that has an AFLAC account and submits a claim can indicate within the portal, I want to get all of my letters electronically, or I want to get my letters in the mail. And then also can choose whether or not they want to get some text notifications for AFLAC to basically say, hey, there's something for you to read, log in and take a look. So AFLAC's interaction with employers is also through a portal. So the AFLAC employer portal is similarly available 24/7, 365 days a year. And one of the most important things to know about this is that access to the AFLAC employer portal happens through the existing Maine paid leave portal. So for any employer that is familiar with going to maine.gov/paid leave and then logging in to do wage reports and contributions and all of that Maine paid leave portal that everybody already knows and loves, that's the access point to get into the AFLAC benefits portal for an employer's purposes as well. So there's no need to create a new login or a new password or any of that. It's simply a matter of logging into the existing portal and then clicking a hyperlink to get into the AFLAC benefits portal using the same credentials. So once an employer is in the AFLAC employer portal, they'll be able to see which of their employees may have submitted a claim. Within each of those claims that have been submitted, for their employees, see the leave reason and requested dates, the status, so whether that claim is approved yet, whether it's been denied, it might still be pending, or the person might have canceled it. And then also employers will be able to interact with AFLAC to provide information if that's needed. And then I want to spend a solid minute on this rectangle at the bottom with claim contact and login access. This is so important. So they're two related but very importantly different concepts. So the claim contact is the email address where AFLAC is going to send notifications. So somebody applies for leave, AFLAC will send an email saying, hey, one of your, I mean, not verbatim, but we'll send a notification letting the employer know your employee has filed a request for leave. And that email is going to go to the email address that the employer has designated as their claim contact. To actually accomplish that designation of the claim contact, that happens within the Maine Paid Leave portal. So anytime you can go to maine.gov/paid leave, go to an employer, and then within that page, there is a contributions expandable tab, and there's a tutorial right there. We'll get there in a minute. And so the claim contact is one per company because all of the emails are going to go to the same claim contact email address. Separately, the login access to get into that AFLAC employer portal, once somebody has actually created a claim, that can be as many people as your organization needs. Again, it's the same credentials as getting into the Maine Paid Leave portal, the existing portal. And if you were to need to add people, so if there's maybe somebody in your organization who will need to get into the AFLAC portal who is not already holding a login for the Maine Paid Leave portal, you can add them and then they will be able to get into both. Okay, so we have, it's 12:48. Let's go through some tips and tricks in the next couple of minutes, and then we'll be in the Q&A for the last few moments. All right, so one thing that employers can do to get ready for this program is to have a really solid understanding of Maine PFML's undue hardship concept. We're the only program with a paid family and medical leave law that has this concept of undue hardship, meaning if an employer feels as though an employee has requested leave without a lot of notice, to be able to make arrangements, and because of that, the timing is just really going to cause operational disruption to an unreasonable degree. It is possible for that employer to basically raise this concept of undue hardship and say, hey, this is going to be so operationally disruptive and have such a significant impact. The undue hardship concept allows the employer to say, hey, we really need to reschedule this leave to a less disruptive time. One of the most important things to be aware of with this very unique concept in our program is that undue hardship is not a mechanism to prevent an employee from taking leave. It is a mechanism to reschedule leave. And sometimes that, will be the result. Sometimes it won't. If it's medical leave, the person's doctor would have to sign off and agree, yeah, rescheduling this leave is okay, and is not going to have a medical impact on the situation. Also, alluding back to, the beginning of the presentation about keeping communication lines open, the idea here is, again, for employees and employers to be in open communication. So sometimes an employee and an employer will be able to just have this conversation before the claim even gets to AFLAC, before the application is submitted in the first place. Sometimes that won't happen. And AFLAC will make available an undue hardship form that an employer can fill out if they feel like that is needed. If that happens, AFLAC will review the information provided on the form. And if AFLAC agrees with the employer's assertion of undue hardship, then the outcome would be rescheduling of the leave request. If an employer knows just we're never going to use this concept, which is a decision that every employer can make, there is a feature within the AFLAC employer portal to waive undue hardship across the board and say we're not going to do this if the organization would rather cut down on paperwork and expedite claims. So this slide is a visual representation of some of the things I was talking about before. In terms of, as I was talking about, in order to get into the AFLAC employer portal, an employer or member of the employer's staff needs to first have access to the paid leave portal, the existing portal. So each organization really needs to think about who needs to have access to get in, potentially to see the AFLAC information. If you need to add a secondary login within that first existing portal, there's a tutorial on our website right down here, adding a secondary login. There's also a tutorial about designating your claim contact. And again, that's the email address that AFLAC will send all their notifications to. So you can go into the Maine paid leave portal and enter the email address that you want them to use for the claim contact purpose. And again, this is all available at maine.gov/paid leave. Click on I am an employer, and there's lots of information here to help you. All right. I think this is the last slide with a few tips and tricks. So just to be aware that, first of all, not every employee in the state is going to need or request Maine paid family medical leave. But if somebody in your organization does, here are some things to sort of be aware of so that you can feel as ready as possible. So if somebody from your organization files an application, AFLAC will send a new case notification email, again, to the claim contact email address. And then what the next step would be to log in, again, as described, to get into the AFLAC employer portal. There's an employer verification form that you can fill out and return to AFLAC. And then to the extent that that employee is eligible and turns in documentation and all of those things, if that happens and the claim gets approved, then AFLAC will send a notification about the approval of the claim. They will also send a notification of any decision. So if the claim gets denied, that will also appear in a notification email. We have gotten to the end of the content. One more plug for maine.gov/paid leave. Tons of information, FAQs, recorded webinars, toolkits, all of that good stuff. And also a contact us section if you need to reach out for more detail. But Reggie, I'm so curious to see what's come in the Q&A.
Yes, and quite a few has, and thank you all for the questions. I know that staff also was answering questions also in real time, so that's super helpful. So we are going to go probably until 1 o'clock, but if we need to go a few minutes after, that's fine too. But the first question that kept popping up was, how will the 7-day...
Sorry, can you stop sharing your screen so that we can...
Yes.
Oh.
I mean, I'm so sad to take down maine.gov/paid leave because everybody should visit, but there you go. Is that better?
Great.
Okay. Yep.
Super.
Okay. Yeah. So the question that kept popping up the most is, how will the 7-day waiting period work for intermittent leave for the employee's own serious illness or injury?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So the waiting period is defined as the 7 consecutive calendar days starting on the first day of leave. So if that is say recovery from surgery and somebody needs to be out for 3 weeks, the first 7 calendar days are not payable because they're the waiting period. But that question was about intermittent leave. So whatever the first day is that first day, and it's 7 consecutive calendar days. There may, within that 7 consecutive calendar days, there may be another intermittent day, there may not. But that's how our waiting period is defined and operationalized.
Okay, awesome. All right, so the next question is, what is the process for an employer to follow up on in order to respond to a new case notification? So they get a notification
Yeah.
when your workers is filed for leave.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So somebody submits an application, AFLAC sends that new case notification email to the claim contact email address. Person operating the mailbox or the email sees it. All right, Sally's requested a claim. So what would happen then would be that they or their colleague or whoever has access to the portals, which may or
Mhm.
may not be the same, it may or may not be the same person that is physically getting that claim contact email. So somebody within the organization needs to then log in to the paid leave portal, finds the link to get into the AFLAC portal, and
Yeah.
that's where you'll be able to search by employee name or case number, find the case, and then look for the employment verification form. If that's, if there's information that you need to provide back to AFLAC. We are actually in the process of putting together a guide that sort of has screenshots and shows, here's how you can accomplish these things. But the idea is that when you've logged into the AFLAC employer portal, you can see high level who has submitted an application, what the dates are of their requested leave, what their leave reason is. And then if those claims get approved, also the weekly benefit amount. It is not the idea is that you will not be able to see the very in the weeds, the certification forms and all of those sorts of things. If the employee has uploaded a certification form, that's not visible to the employer.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, great. And so I have two kind of FMLA questions, but they are kind of interconnected to PFML. So
Sure.
how does the state know whether the employee has taken federal or Maine FMLA?
Yes, that is such a good question. So, because there is no way for AFLAC or the state to know that without
Right.
the employer bringing that information forward. That is a component of the employment verification form. So it has a few different components to it. For example, confirming that the work schedule the employee provided during claim intake, confirming that's accurate. To the point that this person raised, the opportunity to indicate in the previous 12 months, here's how much time the person used for federal or state FMLA without PFML running concurrently. If somebody files a claim and the employer goes, oh, well, they actually left. They're no longer employed by us. There's a date of separation from employment field on the form as well. So things like that. The employment verification form is the mechanism to get information back over to AFLAC.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I see we have a few minutes left. So the other FMLA-ish question is, can an employee take 12 weeks of PFML to care for a sibling for a non-FMLA eligible reason, and then another 12 weeks to care for a parent under FMLA?
Yeah, right. So the provision that I talked about in terms of, PFML request starts previous 12 months, what was used not concurrently for federal and Maine FMLA, it's predicated on the leaves being taken in a certain order.
Mhm.
But so the Maine PFML law has that provision to steer as often as possible toward concurrent taking of leave. But this person is asking a really, really good follow-up question because in some situations, depending on the order of operations and how these life events occur and come up, if somebody is taking paid family and medical leave to care for a sibling, that's not approvable for federal FMLA because that's not a covered family member. So it is possible, if the stars align in such a way, it is possible for somebody to take paid family and medical leave and, start taking down those 12 weeks and have the federal FMLA untouched because if you're out to care for a sibling, that's not federal FMLA. You can't reduce your federal FMLA weeks for that reason.
Okay. All right. So I see we're like at time, and these are very great questions. But the last question I'll ask is, where do employers go to waive undue hardship?
Yeah. So that's a feature within the AFLAC employer portal. So the process would be maine.gov/paid leave, and then navigating to the tile that says I am an employer, logging into the Maine paid leave portal, and then from there getting right into the AFLAC employer portal. And this is one of the things that we're going to be hopefully putting into a guide with screenshots and all of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Sarah, for going through that very thorough PowerPoint. We are at time, and as Sarah said, the recording will be available as well as the presentation shortly soon, hopefully sometime this week. But either way, we just want to thank you all for coming. We know this is a lot of information, but if you still have any questions, please contact our call center or at least go to maine.gov/paid leave. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your afternoon.